Hello everyone, the best stories about mythology for sleeping. Close your eyes and just listen. The dawn of creation, the birth of the gods. In the beginning, before time had found its rhythm, there was nothing but chaos, a yawning void, a dark and endless abyss. It was from this formless chasm that the first spark of life emerged, shaped by the will of forces unseen. No stars gleamed in the heavens, no winds whispered through the silent dark. There was only the aching emptiness, endless and eternal. From the darkness first came Gaia, the earth. She rose, round and fertile, cradling within her the seeds of life. Her body was the soil, the mountains, the oceans. She stretched her arms wide to touch the farthest corners of this new world. But her existence was lonely. In her silent solitude, Gaia longed for union, for a companion who could shape this new world with her. It was Uranus, the heavens themselves, who answered her call. From the union of Gaia and Uranus were born the Titans, giants of unimaginable strength, whose mere breath could shake the earth. They were creatures of order and power, destined to rule the world in the eons to come. The Titans' reign, however, was not to be peaceful. Among them was one who would bring chaos and bloodshed into the world, a dark shadow, whose ambition would fracture the very heavens themselves. His name was Cronus. Cronus, the youngest of the Titans, feared his father's power. Uranus was a cruel and unyielding god, and Cronus, burning with hatred, conspired against him. With the help of Gaia, who gave him a sickle made of flint, Cronus attacked his father, severing the connection between the sky and the earth. With the heavens torn apart and Uranus cast down, Cronus claimed the throne of the gods. He ruled with a tyrant's hand, relentless and unyielding. But even as he sat upon the throne of Olympus, a dark prophecy loomed over him. He had learned, through whispers of fate, that one day his own child would rise against him, just as he had risen against his father. To escape this fate, Cronus took cruel measures. He devoured each of his children as they were born, one by one. First was Hestia, then Demeter, Hera, and Hades. Each was swallowed whole, consumed by their father's hunger for power. But when Rhea, his wife, gave birth to a child who would change the course of fate, she could no longer bear to see her children consumed by Cronus's wrath. She tricked her husband, presenting him with a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes instead of the newborn Zeus. Cronus, thinking it was his son, swallowed it without hesitation. But the child was not dead, and the time had come for the prophecy to unfold. Zeus, hidden away in the mountains of Crete, grew in strength, his heart filled with vengeance for the father who had betrayed him and his siblings. When the time was right, Zeus challenged Cronus, bringing an end to his reign of terror and setting in motion the rise of the Olympian gods. The rise of the Olympians, the Titanomachy. The sky trembled and the earth quaked, as if the very world itself was aware that a great battle was on the horizon. The gods of the old order, the Titans, still ruled from the heights of Mount Othrys, their domain vast and unchallenged. Yet in the shadows, hidden from their sight, the gods of a new age were gathering. Led by Zeus, the son of Cronus, they were determined to overthrow the ancient rulers and claim their rightful place atop Olympus. Zeus was no longer the helpless infant hidden from his father's wrath. He had grown, nurtured by the nymphs of Crete, and had come into his powers. But before he could challenge his father, he first needed allies. The first to join him was his brother Poseidon, the god of the seas, whose trident, could command the waters themselves. Then came Hades, lord of the underworld, a god of both darkness and death, whose realm would soon be cast into shadow. Together these siblings, along with their allies from the depths of the cosmos, prepared to face the Titans in a battle that would reshape the world forever. But the gods knew they could not defeat the Titans on strength alone. They needed a weapon more powerful than any mortal or divine force, a weapon forged from the very essence of the cosmos. The Cyclopes, monstrous beings with only one eye, who had once been imprisoned by Uranus, were freed by Zeus. In gratitude, they forged for him the most powerful weapon known to the gods, the thunderbolt. With this weapon in hand, Zeus could now challenge his father, and all the Titans who had once ruled without question. The battle that followed was unlike any the world had ever seen. It was a war of such magnitude that the stars themselves seemed to tremble in the heavens above. Thunder cracked through the sky as Zeus hurled his mighty thunderbolt at the Titans, and the earth shook with the clash of immortal warriors. Poseidon, wielding his trident, caused the oceans to churn, unleashing monstrous tidal waves that swept across the land. Hades, with his dark powers, summoned the spirits of the dead, sending them to fight on his behalf. For 10 long years, the war raged on, a war that seemed to have no end. The Titans, though mighty and ancient, were not invincible. One by one, their forces were broken by the combined might of the Olympians. The tide turned when Zeus, with a final surge of power, struck down his father Cronus, casting him into the depths of Tartarus, the deepest part of the underworld. With the defeat of Cronus, the Titanomachy came to an end, and the Olympians stood victorious. The world was theirs to rule, and the heavens themselves bowed before them. Yet the gods knew that even in victory, the future held its own trials. The war had left its mark upon the world, and their reign would not be without its own challenges. The earth itself had changed, and now the gods of Olympus took their places upon the thrones of the heavens. Zeus, the king of the gods, ruled over the skies and thunder, while Poseidon claimed the seas, and Hades took his dominion over the underworld. But the balance was fragile, and it would not take much to tip the world into chaos once more. The tragic tale of Orpheus and Eurydice. There was once a man, Orpheus, whose music was so beautiful that even the gods themselves would stop to listen. His lyre could make the trees sway, the rivers stop flowing, and the stones weep. His music was a gift from the gods, a gift that he cherished more than life itself. And yet, it was this very gift that would bring him to his greatest sorrow. Orpheus was in love with Eurydice, a nymph whose beauty rivaled that of the stars. Together, they were a perfect pair, their love a song that echoed across the heavens. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. On their wedding day, as Eurydice danced through the meadows, she was bitten by a serpent, and she fell dead at Orpheus's feet. Despair consumed him, and he could not bear to live in a world without her. And so he made a decision that would seal his fate. He traveled to the underworld, where the god of death, Hades, ruled. There, Orpheus played his music, and with every note, he charmed the very gates of the underworld. Even Hades, the ruler of death, was moved by the beauty of his song, and he agreed to let Eurydice return to life, on one condition. Orpheus must not look back at her until they had both left the underworld. For a time, Orpheus walked beside his beloved, hearing her footsteps behind him. But as they neared the exit, doubt crept into his heart. He could not resist the urge to glance over his shoulder, to see if she was truly there. And in that moment, as his gaze fell upon her, she vanished, lost forever to the underworld. Orpheus, now alone, wandered the earth, playing his mournful music. His songs no longer held the joy they once had, and his heart was consumed with grief. But even in death, his music lived on, carried by the winds, echoing through the ages. The Trojan War, a battle of gods and men. It was said that the Trojan War began because of a single golden apple, an apple that would set the heavens aflame and change the course of fate for mortals and gods alike. This apple, however, was not just an ordinary fruit. It was a gift from Eris, the goddess of strife, who, angered by her exclusion from the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, tossed it among the gods with the inscription, "For the fairest." 3 goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, immediately laid claim to the apple, each believing herself the most beautiful. A bitter quarrel broke out, and soon Zeus himself was called upon to resolve the dispute. In his wisdom, he knew that no matter the decision, there would be a great cost. So, he decreed that the task of choosing the fairest should fall upon Paris, the Prince of Troy, a mortal man. Paris, unaware of the monumental consequence of his choice, was summoned to the goddesses. Each one offered him a tempting bribe. Hera promised him dominion over all of Asia, Athena promised victory in war, and Aphrodite promised him the love of the most beautiful mortal woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. Paris, driven by his desires, awarded the golden apple to Aphrodite, who in turn guided him to Helen, the wife of King Menelaus of Sparta. The gods' interference had set the stage for tragedy. Paris, led by Aphrodite's promise, seduced Helen and took her back to Troy, inciting a war that would involve all the greatest heroes and gods of the age. The Greeks, enraged by the loss of their queen, assembled a vast army to wage war upon Troy. The mightiest of these was Achilles, the son of the sea nymph Thetis and the mortal Peleus. His strength and skill were unparalleled, and his wrath would shape the course of the war. But Achilles was no mere soldier. He was a man of deep passions, bound to the gods themselves. The war raged for 10 long years, a battle not only of men, but of gods. The Olympian gods themselves chose sides. Hera, Athena, and Poseidon supported the Greeks, while Apollo, Artemis, and Aphrodite sided with the Trojans. The gods were not mere spectators. They intervened on the battlefield, bestowing favor upon their chosen warriors, sending signs and omens, and even taking part in the fighting. Achilles, driven by a sense of honor and vengeance, would become the central figure of this war. It was his fury that sparked the greatest conflict, the quarrel between him and Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek forces. When Agamemnon seized the captive Briseis, a woman Achilles had claimed as his prize, Achilles withdrew from the battle in anger, refusing to fight. His absence left the Greeks vulnerable, and the Trojans, led by Hector, their noble prince, began to gain the upper hand. Yet even in his withdrawal, Achilles' name was a shadow upon the battlefield. The gods themselves quarreled, pushing men to fight in a bloody dance of fate. Heroes like Hector, Paris, and the great archers of Troy battled against the might of the Greek forces, while Achilles' closest friend, Patroclus, took his place on the front lines. Patroclus, in his heart, longed to protect the Greeks, but his actions would lead to his tragic death at the hands of Hector. When Achilles heard of Patroclus's fall, his rage broke forth like a storm. He returned to the battlefield, his armor gleaming with divine light, his heart aflame with vengeance. The death of Hector followed swiftly, as Achilles, with godlike fury, slew the Trojan prince and desecrated his body, dragging it around the walls of Troy. But even in victory, Achilles could not escape the consequences of his wrath. The gods, seeing the destruction that had been wrought, began to intervene once more. It was through the intervention of King Priam of Troy, who went to Achilles to ransom his son's body, that the hero's heart softened. In the end, the war was not won by wrath, but by diplomacy, as the gods themselves saw the devastation caused by their interference. Troy would eventually fall, but it was a city broken by the gods' games. The Odyssey, a hero's journey. The fall of Troy marked the end of the Great War, but it was also the beginning of an even greater journey. Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, was one of the Greek heroes who had fought at Troy. His wit and cunning had been crucial in the war's success, including his role in devising the cunning stratagem of the Trojan horse, which led to the downfall of the mighty city. But Odysseus's journey home would become a saga of its own, one filled with trials and adventures that would test his very soul. As the Greeks sailed home from Troy, Odysseus's ship was one of the first to depart, eager to return to his kingdom and his wife, Penelope. Yet the gods, angered by his hubris, cast him into the stormy seas. His journey would span 10 long years, a journey fraught with peril. He encountered many creatures and challenges: the Cyclops Polyphemus, whose eye he blinded; the sorceress Circe, who turned his men into swine; the Sirens, whose songs could lure sailors to their doom; and Scylla and Charybdis, monsters that lurked in the straits, threatening to swallow entire ships. At each turn, Odysseus relied on his cunning, his strength, and the favor of gods who sometimes aided him and sometimes hindered him. Yet, no challenge was greater than the one he faced within himself. Throughout his journey, Odysseus wrestled with his desire to return home and the temptations that tried to pull him away from his goal. His affair with Circe and his lengthy stay on the island of the nymph Calypso were signs of his internal conflict, as he struggled between the longing for home and the pull of the unknown. The gods, too, had a part to play in his fate. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, was his greatest ally, guiding him and protecting him. Poseidon, the god of the seas, however, bore a deep grudge against Odysseus for blinding his son, Polyphemus. For every step forward Odysseus took, Poseidon hurled him back with storm and fury. It was only after 10 long years of suffering that Odysseus finally returned home. But even this victory was not without its trials. His kingdom, Ithaca, had fallen into chaos. Suitors flocked to his palace, hoping to win the hand of his wife Penelope, believing him dead. But Odysseus, disguised as a beggar, entered his house, and with the help of his son Telemachus and a few loyal servants, slew the suitors and reclaimed his throne. In the end, the Odyssey was not just a tale of adventure. It was a story of identity, perseverance, and the search for home. Odysseus had wandered the world, confronted the deepest horrors, and faced the gods themselves. But the real challenge was always within. Could he return to the life he had once known, to the woman who had waited for him all these years? In the silence of his final return, Odysseus realized that his journey had not only been one of physical distance, but also of growth, an inner journey toward understanding the depths of his own soul. Heracles, the 12 labors, One of the most famous heroes in all of Greek mythology, Heracles, was a man of unmatched strength and boundless courage. But his life was one of tragedy as well as triumph, for the mighty son of Zeus was cursed by Hera, the queen of the gods, who resented his very existence. Heracles' 12 labors began as a punishment, a decree from King Eurystheus of Tiryns, who sought to break the hero's spirit. Each labor was designed to be an impossible task, yet through wit, strength, and sheer determination, Heracles overcame each challenge. From the Nemean lion, whose skin was impervious to weapons, to the Hydra, a multi-headed monster that regrew 2 heads for each one cut off, Heracles faced the fiercest beasts and most daunting tasks. One of his most famous feats was the capture of the Ceryneian hind, a sacred deer of Artemis. The goddess herself was enraged, but Heracles' patience and skill prevailed. As he completed each labor, his legend grew. He became a symbol of hope for the people and a figure of divine wrath for the gods. Yet his journey was not without its personal losses. Along the way, he made enemies, lost friends, and ultimately, his own peace. His strength could win battles, but it could not erase the scars of his past. The final labor, the capture of Cerberus, the 3-headed dog guarding the gates of the underworld, was the culmination of his trials. It required not only strength, but also courage and cunning, qualities that had defined his journey from the very beginning. Yet, even after completing these labors, Heracles' life was far from peaceful, as he would go on to face even greater trials in his search for redemption. Good dreams